In 1927, Charles Lindbergh crossed the Atlantic Ocean in his Spirit of St. Louis. He immediately became a worldwide sensation and the most idolized man of his time. Afterwards, he toured the nation and was met with parades everywhere. One of his stops was Jacksonville.
I stood right yonder between the last two pillars and watched Lindbergh circle the city. He came down low, you could just see him, and I thought he was waving to me, but he was waving to the crowd. This place was filled with people.
Before World War II, Jacksonville didn't need a Charles Lindbergh to bring people downtown. They were already there, because downtown was the center of the community.
It was downtown, that's where the action was. It was just absolutely, that's where you wanted to go.
You see, our high school was downtown. The churches were downtown. It was the hub of your life was downtown.
The city was alive. Something was happening on every corner.
If you needed anything, you went downtown. If you didn't need anything, you still went downtown. Downtown was where all the business was conducted. Downtown had all the entertainment. Downtown was the place to just hang out, the place to see and be seen.
Well, they used to have a hot dog stand at the corner of Forsyth and Main called Fiore's.
That's right.
Oh, yeah.
And that's where the trolley, the bus route, and all the rather distinguished citizens would gather at Forsyth and Main, and you'd go between theaters and eat a hot dog for 15 cents and one of them big Cokes for a nickel.
We had a road down there. That was the entertainment section. I mean, that was the
Main and
entertainment.
Forsyth Street was a big corner.
And then the poor class guys, if it didn't have it, skipping school or something, they'd go to what they call a casino theater over on Bay Street. That was strictly a 5 cents deal, and Mr. Smith could probably tell us better, because a lot of the principals would go down there and gather up on about 1:30 in the afternoon. Everybody played hooky from school. You could go clean out the casino theater.
But it had another name, didn't it, Lou?
Well, I think they called it the Fish House.
You couldn't be downtown and say you had nothing to do. In October, thousands of people would gather in front of the Times Union building on Laura Street to see every ball and strike posted for each game of the World Series. At night, downtown lit up and bars were packed. People were drinking beer like it only cost 5 cents, because it did. But the one thing people seem to remember most is dancing.
I was a jitterbug generation.
Yeah, we were the Charleston, you were the jitterbug. New kid on the block. Friday nights, the entire high school community would go to the Seminole Hotel. It cost you $1 to go in. It was called a script dance.
Script dance.
And if you didn't know how to Charleston, you leaned against the wall with both hands in Charleston against the wall.
And what were the most popular songs to dance to?
Stardust and
The bells are ringing for me and my gal.
Sweet Sue.
5'2", eyes of blue.
We know
Oh, what those 5 foot could do.
You might have heard that song coming from here. This was the Roosevelt Hotel. And you might have heard Virginia Keys perform here. She entertained thousands of troops during the Second World War.
The armed forces were in town, the war was on, and it was so mixed up for me. I didn't understand what it was all about. The boys were going overseas, and they were happy, and were they coming back, and the songs were altogether different. So they were there for one last night of happiness.
Live entertainment could also be found in theaters.
You remember the Palace Theater, where we had vaudeville, real live New York vaudeville.
They'd come in on Friday night and Saturday and have a matinee on Sunday afternoon, and people would stand in line for the midnight show and the vaudeville. But they brought in some really fine entertainment with the bands and the orchestra pit, and see a movie.
And some of Jacksonville's child stars performed on these stages. Catherine Bagley ran a dance school, training children to be Shirley Temples or Jackie Coogans. One of Miss Bagley's star pupils was Frank Calhoun. He performed in the 30s to the delight of grown-ups, many of whom kept detailed scrapbooks on his young career, which didn't go quite as planned. He later became a psychologist. But in our research, we dug up an old Hollywood screen test for these Jacksonville kids. Frank hadn't seen the film since he was 7 years old, so we invited him to our studios for a special screening 55 years later.
For an hour or two, I am Clara Bow. I'm sure you like
They called us movie stars. I was in love with her, Joyce Collins. Oh, I was so much in love with her. Oh my God, here's me. Yeah, I was a real ham, boy. I loved it.
But being a child star demanded a lot of time from the young Calhoun. Some nights he'd get home so late he'd go straight to bed, still in costume.
And the next morning I'd get up early to go to school, and my mother would still be asleep. So I'd run across the street to the school, and I'd forget to take my makeup off. And some of the other boys didn't particularly appreciate the way I looked. So I learned how to run at a very early age. Not bad for a 7-year-old.
At one time, there were 24 movie theaters in downtown Jacksonville. Now there are none. Bender Cawthon was a projectionist at the Florida Theater for over 50 years and remembers a Forsyth Street packed with movie houses instead of parking garages.
This was the entertainment, you might say, center of downtown. This block here had 4 theaters on it. To start at this corner down here was the Palace Theater. The next was the Imperial Theater, right here. The third was the Empress Theater. And then the Rialto was on the corner, just a little around the corner there, about 10 feet.
If you went to the theater on a Saturday night and you had a lot of money, chances are you would dress to the nines. Here's a look at some of the fall fashions of 1937. Dressing like this would get you noticed in 1937. It probably would today, too. One place where such formality was appropriate was the DuPont's house in Epping Forest.
We would go to the garden parties, and that's when you did wear your long dresses, or rather longer, and wore your gloves and the hat. Mrs. DuPont, Miss Jason herself, was a quite generous person, a quite gracious person.
All of these ladies were debutantes of Jacksonville and attended the exclusive DuPont parties.
And Sunday afternoons, Miss Jessie would have she would have people over. That was your drop-in visit afternoon. And you would sit outside on the terrace.
It was a glamorous place to go, and the location, right there on the river with the beautiful gardens and how you could wander around those.
I think Mr. DuPont really was a yard-minded person.
Another diversion for people who could afford it was the Clyde Line. The luxury ocean liners launched from downtown and docked in cities all the way up the East Coast.
Oftentimes, a passenger liner or Clyde liner would leave for New York or elsewhere, and the fireboats would spray huge spouts of water up as a celebration of leaving.
And it was a big festive thing when those ships would come in on a Monday morning in the harbor. People would come down and just line the riverfront from the East Jacksonville area, approximately Florida Avenue, to Main Street, just to wave at the passengers getting off the boat.
But as entertainment goes, the passenger ships were pretty tame stuff, especially compared to the Ostrich Farm. The Ostrich Farm was located on the southern bank of the St. Johns River, where the Main Street Bridge is now. You could go there and watch the ostriches, feed the ostriches, and take ostrich rides. Yep, that's right, ostrich rides. Most people rode in little buggies, but a gutsy few sat high atop of these large birds.
Somehow this ostrich jerked loose from the man and just took off. And here I was galloping on this ostrich, can you imagine? And I couldn't either, and finally he just threw me off.
You cannot put no saddle on him or ride him back. You ride him strictly bareback.
Bertie Benyon worked at the Ostrich Farm during the 1920s, and he remembers the correct way to straddle an ostrich.
He's got 2 wings, right? So you put your hand on one wing and hang on the wing on the other. Then you sit on that hump on the back. But then you could wrap your legs around the kind of the back of the ostrich's legs and
kind of hold on more or less by it. That's the only thing you do. But if they stop real quick, you go off his head or you drop off backwards.
The ostrich farm was a popular place to go and was a nice family outing. But there was one 6-block area that was not for the entire family. It was on Houston Street, and it was Jacksonville's red light district.
All along the street here, there were 2-story houses. About every 50 feet, I believe there were 50-foot lots, and all the houses were houses of ill repute. The houses were nice, they were well kept. The girls were very attractive. It was certainly illegal then, as it is now, but they were here and nobody ever bothered them. They created no problems for the city. All of the ladies in the city knew about it and laughed about it. And it was just a well-known street in Jacksonville, probably an infamous street. And this is all we have left of Houston Street. It appears that everything's been torn down. All of the 2-story houses which were here, and certainly all the occupants therein, have long since disappeared or become quite old, if they're as old as I am.
Jacksonville was a thriving port city. Goods and services, illegal or otherwise, were readily available. Along with prostitution, there was bootlegging, rum running, and just about everyone remembers places where you could openly gamble.
You could buy a football parlay, you could buy a baseball pool.
Bet on a horse.
And bet on a horse, or you could put on a tuxedo and go to the Embassy Club or Peacock Club.
You see that tree over there? You can pull up where that tree is. That's where it was. And this was the driveway into Peacock Club.
Pictures from the old Peacock and Embassy Club show classy entertainment establishments where you could spend a lot of money during the night on the town, especially if you went upstairs.
First time I ever saw a $100 bill, I think, was at the Peacock Club. You wouldn't see the gambling unless you went up those steps. But if you went up them, you would see roulette, baccarat, blackjack, just as you see in Las Vegas now.
And people that, you didn't expect to be gambling, you'd think, oh, there's so-and-so. That couldn't be. Oh, well, it is. Well, you rascal, you.
And there was also gambling at the beach, although not quite as sophisticated.
They call it the rat game, they turn the rat loose on a horizontal roulette wheel, and whichever hole he ran down, those people theoretically won merchandise, but normally they just handed out dollar bills.
But gambling was a minor attraction at the beach. 50 years ago, the boardwalk was lined with rides, games, bathhouses, and places to eat. The atmosphere was part carnival, part family picnic. On weekends, the city of Jacksonville emptied out and went to the beach. Hard to imagine looking at it today, but if you don't believe me, ask Berenice Michler.
I was Miss Jacksonville Beach in 1926, and my daughter was...
Berenice has lived most of her life at Jacksonville Beach, and as a teenager, she was a ticket taker at the huge roller coaster that dominated the boardwalk. She remembers the crowd strolling along the boardwalk and how they dressed.
They wore their best clothes. The men wore suits and the women wore beautiful clothes, dresses. And Sunday afternoon, that was it, just like an Easter parade.
That was for the boardwalk. For the water, the clothing was different, but there was just as much of it.
The men covered up everything, and the women did too. And the women had to wear stockings. Every time they go on the beach, they're old-fashioned way down to their knees, and the stockings come up. That's the way they went.
During the 20s, 30s, and 40s, the beach could accommodate the bigger crowds because it was a bigger beach. Room enough for 4 or 5 rows of cars at low tide.
As I remembered, it was about 600 feet wide at dead low tide. It would take you half a day for a little toddler to walk clear to the water.
The beach was so wide it resembled an airport runway, a comparison occasionally helped along by Laurie Young. Sometimes the Jacksonville aviation legend would swoop down to improve his cash flow.
As you climbed up, you gave them your $2 and you carried 5 people at a time, and off they'd go, and they'd circle the beach and come back, put it down, and we'd all ooh and ah like it was Eddie Rickenbacker or somebody, Great. Normally you just didn't see airplanes land and take off. And here we could just, in our bathing suits, holding our sand pail, watch the airplane. It was great.
Tom Alty grew up at the beach, so he was well versed in the do's and don'ts of oceanfront living. But some weekend visitors had to learn the hard way.
The boys from Georgia would come down with their car, and and they'd invariably drive it right up to the surf line, and they'd pop out with a bucket and a rag and go out and dip a bucket full of salt water and commence washing their car. And usually you'd try a few times and tell them about it. You shouldn't do that, but they wouldn't believe you, so we just quit bothering, and we'd stand there and watch them wash their car with salt water.
Aside from the sand, sun, and salt water, there was the pier that stretched out over the water between 2nd and 3rd Avenues.
Well, it went out quite a good ways, and then it was a big dance hall out there, dance floor, and they had a beautiful light up front, and the orchestra was just wonderful.
Berenice Michler remembers dancing on this pier. She should. 50 years ago, she danced 121 continuous hours in a dance marathon, much like the one you're seeing here.
We had 5 minutes rest period every hour. And sometimes I'd dance 2 hours and take 10 minutes. And they'd bring my breakfast to me, and I'd eat it on the dance floor. And sometimes there was a young man in Jacksonville that would come down, and he'd say, "Come on," he said, "let's dance." And I'd dance, and I'd get so tired, and he'd say, "Now you rest on my shoulder." And I would, and he would sort of dance me around, and hold me up while I was dancing.
As the late 30s turned into the early 40s, the mood at the beach changed. World War II was underway. German submarines had been spotted off the coast, and their targets were freighters and tankers.
The Swanee Steamship Company used the old four-piper World War I destroyers that they had converted to banana boats, and they ran right along the coast up from after they came around Key West, and when the German subs silhouetted them against the glow of the city's night sky, they looked just like tankers, so they popped a few of them, and we were inundated with green bananas from Lord knows how far south they ran, clear up to Mayport.
I'm going right back to Jacksonville.
With everything that was going on in Jacksonville back in the 1930s and 40s, you can see how easy it'd be for people to sing songs of praise about their city. Well, one person did just that.
Annabelle Remley wrote Jacksonville's official song, Jacksonville Blues.
Way down south in Jacksonville, the blues won't ever get you, but the love bug will. I'm going right back where I belong.
The song was written in 1943 and recorded by Billy Butterfield, along with vocalist Keely Smith. It was a hit in Jacksonville, and even caught on elsewhere.
The disc jockeys were very cooperative. They started playing it on their shows every day and getting requests for it. The next thing, it showed up on a few jukeboxes around the country.
Harris Remley is the son of the late Annabelle. His mother wrote the song in response to other city songs. Atlanta GA, Little Rock Getaway, and Moon Over Miami were all popular at the time. An hour after seeing the movie Yankee Doodle Dandy with James Cagney, Mrs. Remley was inspired to write Jacksonville Blues. Harris first presented the song to the public at his senior fellows vaudeville at Lee High School.
The blues part of it came into the fact that you were away from Jacksonville and you had the blues to get back to Jacksonville.
The song began to do well nationally and even got a favorable review in Billboard magazine. It was then that Jacksonville Mayor Frank Whitehead, swelling with civic pride, proclaimed Jacksonville Blues as the official song of Florida's gateway city.
So we feel like that we put Jacksonville on the map musically. And I just wish over the years that we had some local station or something that would play it periodically for the thousands of new people who've come to Jacksonville that don't really know that we have a song. But we do.
The song remains, but the city it was written about has changed. It's about to change again. The South Bank Riverwalk is nearing completion. The railroad station is entering a new era as a convention center. The dream of festival shopping will soon be a reality, bringing new hotels along with it. The skyline is changing. If you leave town now and then come back in just 5 years or so, you may come home to a new city.
The people we've heard from tonight probably had no idea that their experiences would be of any interest to the next generation. They were simply living their lives. And of course now, they're living history. And maybe someday, in the not far off enough future, you'll be able to talk about a place without a people mover, or a near empty beach, or a downtown that nobody went to. And the youngsters will look at you in disbelief, but you'll be able to say, yep, that's the way it was, right here in River City.
For a number of years, where I think we made a very serious mistake, was trying to make it go back to what the old Jacksonville was, and that was simply another place at another time that's simply never going to come back. But I think we can have something new that will be probably just as exciting.
Something, it's in the air that makes you feel like a millionaire. I'm going right back to Jacksonville. I'm going right back to Jacksonville.
This is Jacksonville, your city. Gateway to Florida, potential metropolis of the Southeast. It's a city that is just winding up a decade of phenomenal growth and just starting out on another one. In its fine natural harbor stretching along the banks of the beautiful St. Johns River, there is both shipping and shipbuilding. A steady flow of motor traffic back and forth across a modern 4-lane bridge. Downtown in the shopping and business district, there's an endless hustle of activity, an air of prosperity. The crowd moves with sure purpose along the busy streets, looking as though they know where they're going, know how to get there, and are in fact already on their way. All of it says plainly and quite proudly, this is Jacksonville, city with a future.